Hello and welcome back to the Crime Reel. For this week's true crime narration, we shall be visiting New Zealand to look at the lives and untimely deaths of Harvey and Jeanette Crewe. Jeanette was born on the 6th of February 1940. She was the first child born to Leonard Demler and May Schnell. 2 years later, they had a second daughter who they named Heather. The family lived on a farm in Pukekawa, about an hour south of Auckland. The two sisters attended the local primary school. The neighbouring farm was owned by May's brother. In May 1950, when Jeanette was 10 years old, this uncle was killed in a farming accident. He left the farm to his two nieces, Jeanette and Heather, to be held in trust for them to inherit when they reached the age of 25. After completing her secondary education in Auckland, Jeanette trained as a teacher and spent some time travelling. While she was teaching in Wanganui, she met a man by the name of David Crewe, who went by his middle name of Harvey. Harvey was born in the Lower North Island in New Zealand on the 20th of October 1941. He was raised in the farming district and attended school in nearby Wellington. After leaving school, he had various jobs on farms within the area. Around the time when Jeanette and Harvey met, Jeanette's father, Leonard, received a large fine for tax evasion. In order to pay this fine, he was forced to sell a half share in his farm to his wife, May. On the 18th of June 1966, Jeanette and Harvey married in Epsom, Auckland. Harvey purchased Heather's share of the uncle's farm, whereupon he and Jeanette started living and working there as joint owners. The farm, located in Pukekawa, included a 4-bedroom home and was somewhere in the region of 365 acres. They worked hard and seemed happy together. However, on the 29th of July 1967, their peace was disturbed when, while they were out having dinner with Leonard and May, their house was burgled. Several items belonging to Jeanette were stolen, including a handbag, some jewellery, including her engagement ring, and a brush and comb set. The burglar was never caught. The following year, on 1st of December 1968, the couple welcomed their only child, a daughter who they named Rochelle. Whilst Jeanette recovered in hospital, Harvey visited his in-laws for dinner, and when he returned home, found that a fire was burning in one of the bedrooms, ultimately causing damage to around 20% of the property. 5 months later, the couple discovered that their hay barn had been set alight, causing significant damage, but thankfully no injuries. No one was arrested for either of these incidents. Understandably, this unsettled the couple and made Jeanette particularly nervous of being in the house on her own. In February of 1970, Jeanette's mother, May, sadly died after a long illness. Some reports state that after a family dispute, May had bequeathed her half of the farm to Jeanette and had written her other daughter, Heather, who was by then living in the US, out of her will. After his wife's death, Leonard remained living at the farm next to the couple and they were in regular contact. On 16th of June 1970, after completing various forms with the solicitor regarding May's estate, Leonard had dinner with Jeanette and Harvey at their home. The following day, the couple went about their business as normal. Harvey went to view a bull that was for sale, whilst Jeanette and Rochelle had a play date at their home. In the afternoon, the family visited a vegetable market and a stock clearance sale at a nearby farm. The weather was cold and wet, and after finishing off for the day, they returned home to a dinner of fish and chips. The next morning, 18th of June 1970, the local delivery man left bread, milk and a newspaper for the couple. He returned the following morning and was surprised to see that the items had not been touched but still left that day's groceries at the house. On 22nd of June, a further delivery was made. Assuming that the couple had forgotten to give notice that they were going away, the delivery man disposed of the old items and did not leave any further products. Later that same day, Leonard received calls from two people who were trying to telephone Harvey and Jeanette, but without success. Ronald Wright, who was due to collect some sheep from Harvey, contacted Leonard to ask him to pop over and ask Harvey to ensure that the sheep were ready for collection. When Leonard arrived at the house at around 1 p.m, he discovered 18-month-old Rochelle alone and extremely distressed in her cot. There was no sign of 28-year-old Harry or 30-year-old Jeanette, but there was a significant number of bloodstains on the carpet in the lounge. Inexplicably, Leonard's first priority was to leave Rochelle alone and go to telephone Ronald Wright in order to cancel the sheep collection. Around half an hour or so later, Leonard returned to the house, accompanied by his friend, a neighbouring farmer called Owen Priest. Leonard then picked up Rochelle from her cot and took her to the home of another neighbour, Barbara Willis. Meanwhile, shocked at the scene which confronted him, Owen called the Tuakau police station to report the situation. The following day, the house was thoroughly searched, fingerprinted, photographed and bloodstains taken for analysis. It was discovered that some attempts had been made to clean the crime scene as there was diluted blood in the sink. The remnants of the fish and chip meal which the couple had eaten on the 17th of June were still on the table, and there were several soiled nappies left in the kitchen. The police worked on the assumption that a blunt, heavy object had been used to inflict the injuries, and determined that Harvey had been attacked when he was in his armchair and Jeanette while she was completing her knitting. The level of blood in the house, along with some brain tissue near Harvey's armchair, led police to believe that both Harvey and Jeanette were dead. It was believed that they had been murdered in their lounge and then dragged through the hallway and out of the front door. Initially, the police focused on one main suspect, Jeanette's father, Leonard. His delay in reporting the crime scene to the police, preferring instead to cancel a sheep collection, was understandably viewed as extremely suspicious. Leonard's house and vehicles were searched, and he was interviewed at length on multiple occasions. Blood which matched Jeanette's blood group was found in Leonard's vehicle, and he had a scratch on his neck, which he claimed had occurred when he was cutting some bushes. During police searches of the countryside, he would follow them on horseback, watching but never helping. Despite his odd behaviour, all evidence against him was circumstantial, and he absolutely denied any involvement. During this time, baby Rochelle was being cared for by Barbara Willis, who was trying to nurse her back to health. A medical examination showed that she had suffered from some tissue loss, which indicated that she had eaten little or nothing since the 17th of June. That was the day her parents were last seen. However, medical opinion was divided as to whether or not she had been given anything to drink during this period. The theory that someone had visited the house to give the baby water was backed up by a witness, Bruce Roddick, who saw an unidentified woman on the property on the 19th of June, 2 days after the murders. Almost 2 months later, on the morning of 16th of August 1970, Jeanette's body was found in the Waikato River. She had been wrapped in a duvet and bound with copper wire. It was established that she had died from a single .22 gunshot to the head. The police, still believing that Leonard was guilty, took him to the Waikato River to identify his daughter's body. When the police had searched the house, there had been no evidence to indicate that a gun had been fired, so the area was researched in light of this new information. All .22 caliber firearms within just a 5-mile radius were seized and tested. After an examination of a total of 48 such firearms, it was established that only 2 of these could not be definitively ruled out as the murder weapon. The 2 which could not be eliminated belonged to the Eyre family and the Thomas family. Following police interviews, these weapons were also ruled out of the inquiry and returned to their owners. On 7th of September 1970, Jeanette was laid to rest at a church in Tuakau. 9 days later, her husband Harvey's body was found in the Waikato River. He had been wrapped in cloth and tied with galvanised wire. Underneath his body was a vehicle axle which had been used to weigh him down. Harvey had also been killed by a single gunshot to the head. The police continued to interview Leonard, believing that he was responsible for both of the murders. However, upon further investigation, it was established that the vehicle axle which had been used to weigh down Harvey's body belonged to Arthur Allen Thomas. He was one of the two people whose gun could not be definitively ruled out as being the murder weapon. The impetus of the investigation began to change. Arthur Allen Thomas was born in 1938. He had 8 siblings, 4 brothers and 4 sisters. His family lived on a farm approximately 8 miles away from Harvey and Jeanette, and he had known Jeanette when he was younger. It is believed that when he was in his early 20s, he developed feelings for her and pestered her to date him. In December 1962, he bought her a brush and comb set as a gift similar to the one stolen in the earlier burglary. When Jeanette showed that she was not interested in Arthur, he got on with his life and 2 years later married an English woman by the name of Vivian Thomas. A couple of years after they married, they took over Arthur's father's farm at Mercer Ferry Road. To those who knew them, Arthur and Vivian seemed to be a happy couple who were in the process of adopting a child. However, Arthur had now become a person of interest in a double murder. Investigators noticed in the crime scene photographs a louver window was open and started working on the theory that Harvey had been shot from outside of his home. Despite the weather being extremely poor on the evening of the murders and the difficulty with accessing the window to get the correct angle to fire at Harvey in his chair, this was seen as a credible theory. In late October, the garden at the house was searched for the 3rd time, and this time a spent cartridge was found which was subsequently linked to Arthur's gun. Arthur's wife Vivian and his cousin Peter both provided a strong alibi for his whereabouts on the night of the 17th of June. Despite this, Arthur was arrested on the 11th of November 1970 and charged with Harvey and Jeanette's murders. The trial began on the 15th of February 1971 at the Supreme Court in Auckland. The prosecution presented the argument that Arthur had killed the couple in a fit of jealousy. They stated that the fatal shots could have been fired from his weapon, and the cartridge case found later definitely belonged to his weapon. The axle found near Harvey's body and the wire used to bind both victims was consistent with Arthur's farm and was inconsistent with 9 other farms in the area. The defence countered that Arthur's infatuation with Jeanette had long since passed and he was a happily married man. He had a strong alibi for the night of the murders, and despite the prosecution stating that it was his wife Vivian who had been seen visiting the house on the 19th of June, presumably to give the baby some fluids, the witness who saw this was certain that it was not her. 2 weeks later, on the 2nd of March 1971, Arthur was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. Still protesting his innocence, he appealed. This appeal was dismissed on the 18th of June 1971. After further legal wrangling, 2 years later, on 26th of February 1973, the Court of Appeal directed that Arthur should be given a new trial. This began on the 26th of March 1973, whereupon Arthur was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison once again. A further appeal was dismissed, and it would seem that this highly divisive case, which had split public opinion, was over. However, Arthur's supporters campaigned for the case to be reviewed, arguing that forensic work by Dr. Jim Sprott had shown that the cartridge case had been planted at the scene. The 1978 book by David Yallop, entitled Beyond Reasonable Doubt, categorised the conviction as a serious miscarriage of justice. As a result of increasing pressure and questioning of the validity of the evidence, the Prime Minister, Robert Muldoon, appointed Mr. Adam Smith, QC, to investigate the case. The investigation concluded that the spent cartridge found in the garden had not been left by the murderer, but had been created weeks later by the police using the impounded gun and ammunition. It went on to say that Detective Inspector Bruce Hutton and Detective Sergeant Lenrick Johnson were implicated in this misconduct, and Arthur's prosecution had been completely unjustified. Despite the two police officers' conduct being described as an unspeakable outrage, neither were charged with any crime. On the recommendation of the Prime Minister, Arthur was pardoned by Keith Holyoake, the Governor-General of New Zealand, and released from prison in 1979. Having spent over 9 years in prison, he received compensation of just under 1 million New Zealand dollars. This was the equivalent of around 6.3 million New Zealand dollars or 3.2 million British pounds today. In 2010, a book was published called Arthur Allen Thomas, The Inside Story. This book theorises that one of the detectives who was implicated in the planting of evidence, Lenrick Johnson, should actually have been a suspect in the crime. Lenrick, who died in 1978 before the results of the misconduct investigation were made public, knew Jeanette from Pukekawa School. However, those who knew Lenrick have dismissed this claim as total nonsense. The other officer involved in the scandal, Bruce Hutton, died in 2013, the year before Harvey and Jeanette's daughter, Rochelle, campaigned for an official review of the police investigation. This review acknowledged the failures of the police in terms of the investigation, but failed to acknowledge that they were wrong in pursuing Arthur. The report also ruled out Jeanette's father, Leonard, having any role in the murders. Now 76, Arthur and his family expressed their frustration that he had, once again, not been completely exonerated. Rochelle said that she was satisfied with the police review and happy that her grandfather, Leonard, who died in 1992, had been cleared after years of speculation. Rochelle has returned to her life of privacy away from the public eye. However, it still remains that no one has ever been successfully prosecuted for the murders of Jeanette and Harvey, and the case officially remains unsolved. Arthur and his family have continued to petition for the reopening of the 50-year-old case, particularly in light of new DNA technology, but to date this has not happened. In a further twist to this story, it was made public in December 2019 that Arthur, who is now 81, has been charged with historical sex offences against 2 women. He was due to appear in court in March 2020, but I've been unable to find any updates about this. Arthur's family fear that due to the events surrounding Arthur's convictions and pardon for Harvey and Jeanette's murders, that he will not receive a fair trial, nor the presumption of innocence that all deserve until proven guilty. Thanks very much to Skepti Kiwi for recommending this case to me. Thanks very much for listening to that story. Please add any comments down below. Please remember there will be a separate video for petty crimes. Thanks very much for listening to The Crime Reel. Stay safe. Goodbye. Psst. Following the 1978 book by David Yallop entitled Beyond Reasonable Doubt, there was a film made in 1980, directed by John Lang. The star was an English actor called David Hemmings. Goodbye.